welcome to the Writing Instruction DVD series. I'm Tiffany Griffith, Director of Writing at the University of Evansville. This video is going to focus on clarity in writing. We also fondly refer to this as sounding like a human. So we're going to examine what contributes to and what detracts from clarity. Things like false erudition, awkward or confusing wording that simply doesn't accurately convey the author's meaning, unclear references, broad generalizations, and tense shifts, just to name a few. So let's get started. First of all, word choice is essential. As always, make sure that you say what you mean and that what you're saying and what you have written on the paper is clear and accurately reflects what you were trying to say. When you're thinking about word choice for formal writing, essay writing that you do in college, you want to make sure, again, that you're clear and precise in your choice of language. Avoid slang and wording that's too informal or casual for the situation. Many of you have probably been told, don't write like you talk. Now, there is some truth to this particular adage. While you would want to write clearly in the same way that you would strive for clarity when you're speaking and communicating from person to person, you still want to sound like a human being. However, we avoid some of the more conversational words and phrases that we might use in speech when we're writing. Let's take a look at this example, which includes one of my favorite words, y'all. Y'all can see in this example that clarity is important. Now, while we might use y'all regularly when we're speaking, it's a little bit informal and too casual, and perhaps a potential regionalism since there are certain parts of the country that don't use the word y'all. So it might not be your best choice for formal writing. So you might modify this to say, this example demonstrates that clarity is important. On the other side, while you don't want to be too casual, you don't want to be too informal, you don't want to sound stilted. You don't want to sound like you're straining too hard to make your point. You want to be sure that you're using words that are clear to the reader. You want to use words that the reader will understand and know the meaning of. Typically, or often, people try to use larger words and a broader vocabulary in an attempt to sound smart, or they try to overstuff their sentences with unnecessary words and phrases, again, to sound more smart, more erudite, more intellectual. And again, clarity and being clear is going to make you sound much smarter than trying to use a lot of overblown words that don't necessarily apply to the situation. For instance, if you're writing to an audience that doesn't have any specific knowledge about your topic, you're probably simply going to confuse them if you use jargon or technical terms. I've pulled the following example from the Hodges-Harbrace Handbook for Writers, and it gives an example of an ornate sentence and then a clearer, more concise version of the sentence. So let's look at the ornate version first. The majority believes that achievement derives primarily from the diligent pursuit of allocated tasks. While this may sound good, it's a little bit inflated. So let's look at a clearer version that is also a little more direct and to the point. Most people believe that success results from hard work. It conveys the same meaning as the previous sentence, but it gets rid of some of the unnecessary padding, some of the overblown language, and cuts straight to the point, which is really what you want to try to achieve when you're writing. So let's take a look at a few examples that have been culled from various student papers over the years. While racism is often used in many different storylines, the amount of aggression, racism, hate, and fear that was used in this movie was extensive. While it was extensive and there could have been less manufactured into this movie, the total amount was substantial for ending it. There's a lot going on in these sentences. And you kind of get the sense, you get an idea of what the student is getting at least at the very beginning, but as the sentences go on, they become slightly less clear. There's some vague wording, some words and phrases that don't necessarily get across what the author is trying to say, and really just kind of contribute to some confusing wording and making it difficult for the reader to understand. So let's take a look at this. The amount of aggression, you could probably just eliminate that particular part of the sentence. That was some potentially unnecessary wording. And then while it was extensive, it's potentially unclear what it refers back to. So you want to potentially clarify that. And there could have been less manufactured into this movie. Manufactured is a really unusual word choice here that I don't think accurately gets across what the author was trying to say. And in fact, in talking with this student, he ended up changing this particular word because he wasn't happy with it. Manufactured, when we talk about manufacturing, we talk about creating or making things. And really this person is talking about including too much of it, which again we need to clarify in this particular movie. The amount was substantial for ending it. Substantial means big, a lot, but might not be the best choice for this example. So let's take a look at a way to help refine this sentence and more clearly get across what the person was trying to say to begin with. While racism is often used in storylines, the aggression, racism, hate, and fear in this movie was extensive. The film might use too many examples of racism, but the examples effectively raise awareness of racism as an issue in society. Again, this is a much more simplified, much more concise version that more clearly gets across the reader's original or the author's original intent. So the reader doesn't have to make connections and sort of parse what the person was trying to say. Let's take a look at one more example, actually from the same paper. Even though the scenes were a little too graphic at some rate, they are good ways to show how racism really was and how not everything is what it is made out to be. Now, this one's a little bit better, but there are still a couple of awkward moments. The scenes were a little too graphic at some rate. Typically when we think of rate, we think of cost or speed. So this particular phrase might not accurately, again, get across what the author was trying to say. Even though the scenes were a little too graphic, they are good ways to show racism and how not everything is what it seems. Again, we're just cutting out some of the words that aren't necessary to the sentence, and by just eliminating some of the excess, you get a more concise, clear version of what the author was trying to get across. One of the most important things that any writer can do, when revising a paper, when trying to make it sound better, and to making sure they're accurately getting across their intended meaning, is to read a paper out loud. Read the paper to yourself, read it to someone else, have someone else read it out loud to you. When you read a paper out loud, as opposed to reading through it in your head, it forces you to slow down, and you're more likely to pick up on errors, things that you missed. If you've left words out, you're more likely to notice that they're missing rather than just filling them in your head. Also, if you start stumbling over something, it might mean that that's something you should look at. Maybe that part of the sentence isn't particularly well worded. It could be more clear. So, again, best free advice I can give any writer, read your work out loud. Let's take a look at a couple more examples before we move on to our next point. This is from a different student paper, and it's a very descriptive example. He was wearing cowboy boots, a pink plaid kilt, a nose that could smell the Colombian coffee right then and there, and a forehead big enough to play a drive-in movie on. Now, certainly, there are some images here that are very easy for the reader to imagine. It's a very engaging description. But we have a slightly awkward example of wording here, because while there are parts of the things in the list that you could wear, like cowboy boots and a kilt, you probably can't really wear a nose unless it's a fake nose, and you can't wear a forehead. You have a nose and you have a forehead. So just a couple of minor tweaks will help to clarify the meaning in this sentence. He was wearing cowboy boots, a pink plaid kilt, and had a nose that could smell the Colombian coffee right then and there, and a forehead big enough to play a drive-in movie on. Again, a couple of minor adjustments help to streamline the sentence and promote clarity. As an additional example of clarity and a couple of unusual word choices, let's take a look at a student paper on obesity. Spake informs us that in 2004, Obesity Research magazine reported that the nation spent $75 billion on obesity-related problems by the nation. That's a huge amount of money to being paid for, but as Spake argues that if healthcare were continued to pay for obesity before it complicated into other health problems, then we would not be spending as much in the long run. I think we can streamline this just a little bit. Spake informs us that in 2004, Obesity Research magazine reported that the nation spent $75 billion on obesity-related problems, and just end there without repeating nation. And in the second part, we can just cut out a few things wholesale because they're really just adding information that's not needed and muddying up the sentence. That's a huge amount of money, but as Spake argues, if healthcare were to pay for obesity before it led to other health problems, then we would not be spending as much in the long run. Again, to being paid for, to being is an awkward construction. That's a lot of money to pay for. But again, if we just eliminate this, it doesn't add any clarity and doesn't help to make the meaning more clear. So that's a huge amount of money. But as Spake argues, that is unneeded, so we can simply eliminate it. As Spake argues, if healthcare were to pay for obesity before it led to other health problems. Complicated into, it's an unusual construction, not typically how we would phrase this, and led to is a much more clean and clear version of this. The final thing I'd like to draw your attention to in this particular sentence is the use of than here. If healthcare were to pay for obesity before it led to other problems, then we would not be spending as much in the long run. In this case, you want the word that refers to time. Now this brings up an example of things we see a lot in student writing, and it happens to anybody who writes. I make these mistakes, but you have to go back through and proofread carefully. In many instances, this is an issue with spell check. So for here, we want to use then instead of than because we're referring to time. Then refers to time, than makes a comparison. I like chocolate ice cream better than vanilla ice cream. I ate the chocolate ice cream, then I ate the vanilla ice cream. Than for comparison, then for time. Again, reread your paper after you run spell check. We have two more examples of this particular error. When Karen went off to college, the car became more of a burden than a necessity. Again, simply change the E to an A. Comparison, use than. There is nothing more disturbing than to sit in the presence of several open mouths chewing a mile a minute or slurping the liquid contents from containers. There's nothing more disturbing than to sit. Again, then is for time, so we just switch to this to than. And I might recommend changing this to sitting in the presence of several open mouths chewing because it matches the structure of the other verbs. So again, proofread your papers carefully. Even after you've run spell check, this doesn't mean you're done. If you read your paper again, you might catch a few errors that spell check is going to gloss over because there are so many words in the English language that have different meanings and are spelled differently but sound the same. You can potentially run into problems. To and to, there, and there, all different words, sound alike, different meanings. So, read your paper out loud to yourself. You might be more likely to pick up some of these awkward wordings and some of these potential spelling errors. I particularly like this example because it's something that easily happens to all of us. Most people are superstitions in some way or another. It's going to be pretty clear to most people that this particular person, this particular author, meant most people are superstitious in some way. Again, it's just that one little letter. Superstitious is a word, superstitions is a word, but people don't tend to be superstitions, they're superstitious. So just a little careful reading and extra time with your paper is going to lead to a more clear product. Finally, I'd like to throw in a word of caution about the thesaurus. While a thesaurus is a very useful tool and can help keep you from repeating the same word over and over again, they can provide helpful alternatives. You need to be very judicious in your use of the thesaurus. Be careful. Don't just randomly decide you don't like a word and look for something that sounds better. You want to make sure that the word you're using that sounds better actually has the same meaning and an accurate meaning. So again, say what you mean to say. Make sure your wording accurately gets that across to the reader. If you want to talk about a smell, for instance, and you want to say, I like the smell of freshly baked cookies, but you're just not quite happy with smell. Maybe it's too boring. So you look up thesaurus, you look up smell, and you might get words like odor, aroma. Now you have to be very careful about which one of these to choose because you have to be aware of the connotations of words. Connotations are the additional meanings that words carry. Odor has a negative connotation. So while you might talk about the odor of the skunk, you probably won't talk about the odor of freshly baked cookies. In this case, aroma is going to more accurately convey what you're going for. I enjoy the aroma of freshly baked cookies. So Read carefully, make sure you're saying what you really, really meant to say. Another issue that can contribute to clarity or lack thereof and create problems with understanding are broad generalizations. You want to be sure, again, to be accurate and to be fair. You want to beware of making broad blanket statements without any form of support to back up what you're talking about. A broad generalization seems to make an assumption that something is true when it might not be true in all cases. For example, in this student paper about the appeal of horror films, a student included this sentence: "There are a lot of frightening scenes and loads of gore which causes people to be enthralled because all people have demented minds and they love to see other people getting tortured or dying." Now, I think the implication here is fairly clear. I'm okay with a lot of frightening scenes, loads of gore, which causes people to become enthralled because we want to know why people become enthralled. But here's where we run into the issue. I think it might not be fair to say that all people have demented minds, and surely not all people love to see others getting tortured or dying. You might say because many people have demented minds, or many people love to see other people getting tortured. But you have to be really, really careful about making the statement that everybody likes to see people dying. This is probably not the case. In another example from a student paper on families, on the other hand, no matter what, family will always be around. At times, people don't have family around, but usually there's a family figure somewhere in their life. Within the family, there is always something or someone to relate to. Again, be careful about using the word always, because always means in every single case. No matter what, family will always be around. Family will usually be around, or no matter what, family will be around. It's still sort of a generalization, but it's much less concrete and broad than always. And notice we get a clarification here. At times, people don't have family around, but usually there's a family figure somewhere in their life. So again, usually helps to clarify and narrow this a little bit. And again, within the family, there's always something or someone to relate to. You might just choose often instead of always. One final example of the broad generalization: everyone believes that black cats are bad luck, so we try to avoid them. Maybe not everyone does. Maybe somebody really likes black cats, or someone thinks they're good luck. Many people believe that black cats are bad luck, so we try to avoid them. A simple fix. Something else that shows up frequently in student writing is vague this, or vague and unclear pronoun references. If you have a pronoun, remember that it needs to be clear to the audience and to the reader what it's referring back to. We talked in a previous video about how you have to be careful about using the word this to refer to everything you've just said, to an entire previous paragraph. You could say this example, this instance, this idea. If there's a word right after it that this refers to, it helps to make the issue more clear. So let's take a look again at some student examples. All of these options make a broad range of vehicles. This includes a high-priced Ferrari to an inexpensive Geo. Okay, here we're not quite sure what all of these options are. However, it's safe to assume that this was made clear in the preceding sentences. Our more problematic issue is the word this. This includes a high-priced Ferrari to an inexpensive Geo. Now, this seems to refer back to the broad range of vehicles, but again, your reader's going to have to take a moment to stop and figure that out. So this range includes a high-priced Ferrari to an inexpensive Geo. Just a little word in there to help clarify the meaning. In another example, many times with divorce, there may be resentment, anger, and hurt feelings. This is important to mention because divorce is very common in today's society. Well, does this refer back to hurt feelings, to resentment? In this case, it's probably safer to say this idea or this problem is important to mention, or this tendency is important to mention because divorce is very common in today's society. So we have something there that this can point to give the reader a clearer idea of your intent. In one final example, I have a paragraph from a student paper that includes vague this, but it also has a series of unclear pronoun references that just build on each other to lead to a paragraph that's completely confusing for the reader. If you really stop and think about it, you can kind of figure out what the author is talking about, but it also helps if you've read the book, which again is making an assumption that might not be true. This compares to J.M. Coetzee's Waiting for the Barbarians, because in this book, they were also narrow-minded. For example, that they would torture random people from outside the village to figure out where their invading forces are and what their tribe is planning on doing. Of course, these people just told them what they wanted to hear so that they would stop being tortured. This gave the townspeople faulty information, making them believe that these barbarians were actually a threat to their town. The author of this particular paragraph is making a lot of assumptions and a lot of jumps in terms of what the reader is going to be able to connect from one thing to the next. So, first of all, this compares to J.M. Coetzee. This is again referring to several ideas that came before, so clarify for the reader, what is this? Okay, and the second, this, because in this book, it's fine. This refers to book, and the book we're referencing is Waiting for the Barbarians. They were also narrow-minded. In this case, we don't know who they are. The main character, perhaps we could clarify the group of people being discussed in this case. For example, that they would torture. In this case, we can just cut out that, and we have additional clarity here. For example, they would torture random people from outside the village to figure out where their invading forces are. If we have the first they clarified, because in this book, the colonists were also narrow-minded. For example, they would torture. They more clearly refers back to colonists, so we have an idea of what the author's talking about. For example, they would torture random people from outside the village to figure out where their invading forces are. In this case, there is going to refer back to the closest noun. We can make the jump that the author is talking about the random people, but since village is the last noun, again, we could make this more clear. They would torture, maybe we could say they would torture natives from outside the village to figure out where the natives' invading forces are and what their tribe is planning on doing. If we clarify their and say natives, their tribe is much more clear. Of course, these people just told them. We need to figure out who these people are and who them is. So, of course, these natives just told the colonists what they wanted to hear so that the natives would stop being tortured. A little bit of information can help improve clarity. This gave the townspeople faulty information. Again, we have this referring to everything that was talked about in the prior clause. So let's clarify this. What is this? This torturing gave the townspeople faulty information, making them believe that these barbarians. Or this faulty information gave the townspeople the impression that the barbarians were actually a threat to their town. In this case, you have a whole lot of vague pronoun references and unclear pronouns that just keep building on each other to create a big ball of confusion. So anytime you can provide additional information for your reader without making your sentence overly clunky, it's probably a good idea to do so. Some other things that can contribute to a lack of clarity and confusion, and sometimes some unfortunate moments of comic relief that were completely unintended by the author, are problems with modifiers. Now, a good way to avoid this is to make sure you get your modifier as close as you can get it to the word it's describing. And modifiers are simply words that describe or modify in some way another word. Things like adjectives and verbs that modify nouns or pronouns or verbs. So adjectives and adverbs, those are your modifiers. The two main problems we run into with modifiers are dangling and misplaced modifiers, which are closely related but not exactly the same thing. A dangling modifier is when you use a modifier without providing any word for it to describe. Often this is the case when you have an introductory clause or phrase. For introductory phrases, the first noun or pronoun in the sentence is going to be the thing that that phrase modifies. So you need to make sure they match up. For example, if you say, after swimming in the pool, lunch was served, It sounds as if lunch was swimming in the pool. This is probably not the case, and we would certainly hope not, so we need to clarify who was swimming in the pool and who served lunch and what's supposed to happen when. So after swimming in the pool, we were served lunch, lets us know we were the ones swimming in the pool. Or if you were to say, after swimming in the pool, the butler served lunch. Now this would be fine as long as it was the butler who was in fact swimming in the pool. So let's take a look at a couple of other examples. When a 4-year-old girl, her uncle would smoke his pipe and bounce her on his knee. Hopefully the problem here is obvious. It's not likely that the uncle was a 4-year-old girl. So you might simply say, when she was a 4-year-old girl, her uncle would smoke his pipe and bounce her on his knee. So you can provide additional information in that introductory phrase, or you can provide, as we saw previously, the information immediately following it. If you were to say, standing at the street corner, a car splashed mud all over my new coat, hopefully we're not trying to say that the car was standing at the street corner. So when I was standing at the street corner, a car splashed mud all over my new coat. Let's take a look at a couple of short examples from student papers. Written in 1980, Coetzee utilizes this novel to bring to light the hypocrisies of authority and the corruptive ways in which they are capable of using power to control humankind. Well, Coetzee is the author, so he wasn't written in 1980. So if you wanted to fix this, you might say, written in 1980, Coetzee's novel brings to light the hypocrisies of authority, etc. Again, provide enough information in the right place to make your meaning clear. Another example from the same paper, described to him as barbarians, the narrator, as a man of power, is expected to treat the people harshly and believe they are enemies, as Colonel Joel in the army does. Again, the narrator is probably not the one who's been described as barbarians. So you might say, because the natives were described to him as barbarians, the narrator, as a man of power, is expected to treat people harshly. Closely related to the dangling modifier is the misplaced modifier, which is essentially exactly what it sounds like, a modifier that's misplaced or not where it needs to be. And this can create confusion in a similar way to the dangling modifier. Usually the misplaced modifier is simply too far away from the word that it's meant to describe. For instance, Andrea bought a silk dress at a thrift store with a broken zipper. The thrift store probably doesn't have a broken zipper. This needs to refer back to the dress. So you would simply fix this by moving the modifier closer to what it describes and saying, Andrea bought a silk dress with a broken zipper at a thrift store. Another example involves monkeys. Monkeys are always funny. The monkey ate the banana hanging from a tree. Now in this case, the implication is that the banana is hanging from the tree. And this is an interesting example because this could be the case. However, if it's not the banana that's hanging from the tree, but the monkey, you need to move the modifier closer to monkey. So, the monkey hanging from a tree ate the banana. It's all about getting the modifier as close as you can get it to what it's describing. Let's take a look at an example from a student paper. According to Crispin Sartwell, everybody commits heinous acts in his essay, The Genocidal Killer in the Mirror. Now in this case, it certainly sounds like what the author is saying is that everybody commits heinous acts in the essay, which is probably not quite what she was trying to get across. Let's try to alter this to more accurately get across our meaning here. According to Crispin Sartwell's essay, The Genocidal Killer in the Mirror, everybody commits heinous acts. This is a much more accurate representation of the essay and a much more accurate representation of what the author was meaning to say. So remember to read carefully, get your modifiers as close as you can get them to the words that they describe, and make sure that all of the necessary pieces are in there for your modifiers and the words that they're describing. Another usage issue that can impact clarity and the way that the audience is going to read your work is to think about avoiding discriminatory language. You want to remember to be inclusive when you're talking about any sort of difference, such as age, race, or gender. You want to, again, be respectful and inclusive. And one of the issues, or one of the ways that this most commonly manifests in writing, tends to be related to gender. For instance, if we have the example, a pilot is concerned about the safety of his passengers. Well, the problem with this is that not all pilots are men. So you want to try to be inclusive. And for many years, the masculine pronoun was sort of the default, but this has been changing. So you could potentially use the female version and say a pilot is concerned about the safety of her passengers. But again, if you do that, you're leaving out men. So one of the easiest ways to fix this is to just make it plural and say pilots are concerned about the safety of their passengers. Similarly, a doctor must focus on the well-being of his patients. Not all doctors are men, so you might say doctors must focus on the well-being of their patients. This also comes up when we talk about humanity, or often this is referred to as mankind. Now, obviously, we know because historically mankind has been used to refer to humanity in general, but this is potentially exclusive of half of the population, women. So rather than saying man's achievements in space exploration are phenomenal, you might modify this to say humanity's achievements in space exploration are phenomenal. So again, it's just these minor alterations that work to make your writing more inclusive, more aware, and more respectful of differences. Related to clarity in structuring essays and just being appropriate, one of the most common questions that I and many instructors get is, can I use first person? Should I use first person? And this is a very important consideration when framing your paper. It's going to affect how you're perceived by the reader, and it's going to affect, obviously, how you come across in that way. So the answer is, it depends, and it's always a good idea to double check with your instructor and see how he or she feels about use of first person. As some general guidelines, though, first person is typically used and appropriately used when writing personal events, when you're discussing your experiences and something that's happened to you. Keep in mind that using first person and using I places an emphasis on the speaker and on the writer as opposed to on the reader or on the ideas being presented. But if you're using first person and personal experiences to support or illustrate a point, it might be perfectly appropriate to use first person. So let's take a look at an example from a student paper. This is a paper about lying, and the person is using his experiences to illustrate and support his point. Lies not only occur in movies, they happen in everyday life as well. I have had personal experiences where lying has led to bad situations. And in this case, the person goes on from here to describe those personal situations using first person. So again, here, it seems acceptable and appropriate to use first person since this person's going to describe their own experiences, his own experiences. First person has some advantages. It makes it clear to the audience that you're presenting your own ideas and your own opinions as opposed to someone else's. But again, it places the emphasis on the author. There are some potential issues, and this is one of the reasons many people caution their students about using first person. If you keep repeating I feel or I think over and over, you run the potential risk of your reader making the assumption that your understanding is limited to your own personal experience, or your own feelings. So that might not be something you really want to go for in a paper. The other potential problem, particularly if you're writing something that's argumentative, if you keep saying I think, I feel, again, the reader might think your knowledge is limited to your own personal experiences, but it almost sounds as if you're apologizing for the assertion and the stance that you're taking. So if you say, I think, I feel, it's kind of like, I'm sorry, I could be wrong, and I know you have your own opinion, which the reader will, but you run the risk of potentially weakening your stance and your presentation of that stance, as opposed to if you were to just make a direct assertion. Another question people ask me is about using you, which is called second person. And it's often, again, worth consulting with your professor of how he or she feels about using second person and you in a paper. Using you addresses the reader directly. It focuses attention on the reader. It can be a strategy to help draw the reader in and engage the audience with your text. And some professors don't mind using the word you to refer to a person or to people in general. But again, there are some potential problems with this because we typically use you when we're offering advice or giving orders or instructions, and you may potentially run the risk of alienating your readers because if you keep saying you, it kind of sounds like you're poking at them and pointing your finger at the audience. So again, you want to be aware of irritating or potentially alienating your audience, particularly if what you're saying doesn't apply to the people reading your essay. So let's take a quick look at a couple of examples from student essays. Whether you like the psychological thrillers or the slasher flicks of the 80s, there is a horror movie for everyone. No matter what kind of scare you dare, you can find a movie out there for you. Now, while this makes the reading potentially more personal, it addresses the reader and it might draw the reader in, you might potentially alienate the reader if he or she doesn't like horror films at all. So you could say, whether the audience likes psychological thrillers or the slasher flicks of the 80s, there is a horror movie for everyone. No matter what kind of scare is preferred, there is a movie out there for everyone. Again, this might not be the most ideal rewording, but there might be a way to recast this particular idea in these sentences to cut out the use of second person. Let's take another look at an example, and in this case, see if you notice anything about the tone and the sort of atmosphere that's generated by using second person. What about those chain letters that everyone hates? I know everyone gets them. You know the ones that say, if you repost it, then your true love will tell you that they love you. Or if you don't, then you'll have the worst luck ever. Now in this case, again, it does sort of establish a kind of intimacy with the reader, but also using you lends this more informal and casual conversational feel to this particular paper, which again can work depending upon your purpose and the parameters of the assignment. But again, it might work against you if your writing comes across as too informal. Here's another example that includes you and another potential issue. In movies, you will see someone who walks under an open ladder and paint will fall on them. They always say the bad luck is what caused the paint to fall on their head. Again, in movies, you will see. Now, you in this case seems to be referring to people in general. So you could say, in movies, someone who walks under an open ladder will have paint fall on them. They always say. Now, the they is the issue we have in the second part of the sentence. Who are they? Now, they here seems to be referring to the they who say things. So that's another issue you want to be aware of. It's potentially a little casual, but it's also vague. We need to clarify who they is. Even if you say, people always say the bad luck is what caused the paint to fall on their heads, something along those lines. So be aware of using they in vague and unspecific ways, just like you would using this. And the other issue with using you, again, it adds to a conversational tone. And while we use you in conversation, and while I'm referring to you right now in some cases, it's because I'm specifically engaging an audience. And if you're talking to someone, you can afford to be a little bit more conversational and casual, but you want to be sure that you're focused on the context of your paper and the purpose you're trying to achieve. So how do you fix this? How do you avoid using you? There are a few ways around this, and let's take a look at a few examples right now. Let's start out with an example with you. When you eat a cheeseburger, you should consider both flavor and texture. Okay, well, maybe you are a vegetarian, so you doesn't necessarily apply to the reader in this case. Or you feel like this is making your topic a little too informal for what you're trying to go for. So let's look at another option. In many cases, many instructors will use one, or will advocate using one in case of you. So let's take a look at how that might work. When one eats a cheeseburger, it is important to consider both flavor and texture. Now, if you'll notice when you use the word one in place of you, it elevates the language slightly. It lends to a more formal feeling that in this case sounds a little stiff. There's just something that seems false and strikes a wrong note about saying when one eats a cheeseburger. I'm not saying it's not a perfectly dignified topic to write about, but it might not warrant the use of one in this case. One option, additionally, is to use we. Now, let's take a look at this with the cheeseburger example. When we eat a cheeseburger, it is important to consider both flavor and texture. Now, this to me seems a little less stilted and stuffy than using one, but is a little more formal and elevated than using you. But we won't always work. You need to, again, make sure it's clear to your audience who we is. Are you talking about you and the audience, you and the reader, you and your instructor, or does we refer to humanity in general? And again, you might consult with your individual instructor and see how he or she feels about using we. But it can be an option in place of you or one if you don't feel like either of those would work. One final option is to just cut the pronoun out completely. So let's see how that could work. When eating a cheeseburger, it is important to consider both flavor and texture. Now in this case, it works fairly well to just completely cut out the pronoun. It might be slightly more engaging and direct communication with the reader if you used we instead. But again, there are lots of different options. Just make sure you figure out what sounds best to you, what you think is going to fit your purpose and the context in which you're writing best, and what matches up with the parameters of the assignment and your instructor's expectations. A final issue that can certainly impact the clarity and the perception on the part of the reader of your essay is verb tenses, mainly tense shifts. And these are things you want to avoid. When you are writing, you want to be sure to be consistent. Again, you want to be clear, you want to be precise, and you want to be consistent. So you don't want to jump back and forth between past tense and present tense. Now, when we're telling stories, one-on-one, when we're having a conversation, it's not uncommon to use present tense to create a sense of immediacy. For instance, if I say, I was walking to work this morning and a squirrel jumps out in front of me and it picks up a brick and it throws it at my head. Okay, now first of all, I started with the past tense and I've shifted. Not as big of an issue in conversation, but again, in formal writing, it's going to be potentially a problem for clarity. It's going to be confusing, and so the reader's not sure if we're happening in the past or happening in the present. But when we tell stories one-on-one in person, it's not unusual to use present tense. But when you're dealing in formal writing with events that have happened in the past, things that are historical, you want to use past tense. These are things that are done, that have happened. If, however, you're referring to texts, then you want to use present tense. You're talking about what a writer says, what a writer argues, for instance. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Plato wrote Phaedrus in approximately 360 BC. This has happened a long time ago. Phaedrus was written ages ago. Plato wrote it. Plato is dead. So it's safe to cast this in the past tense. If, however, we're talking about the text and what Plato is saying, then we want to use present tense. So we would say, in Phaedrus, Plato writes, "There is no greater good than this, that either human self-control or divine madness can offer a man." So remember, be consistent, be clear. Make sure you're using the right tense for the right situation. Let's look at an example from a student essay. The euphoria lasts a few seconds. However, the high the audience received keeps the viewer interested in what is to come. Notice that we're talking about something happening in present tense at the beginning. Euphoria lasts only a few seconds. And then in this last part, we've shifted completely to past tense. So if you're talking about something that's already done, you would say the euphoria only lasted a few seconds. However, the high the audience received kept the viewer interested in what was to come. This might be an instance where you could use present tense and say, however, the high the audience receives keeps the viewer interested in what is to come. So just make sure you're finding a tense that makes sense for what you're doing, and be sure to be consistent throughout. So we've discussed several issues that are going to impact the clarity or lack thereof of your writing in general. So let's just review some of the main points. First of all, clarity is essential to good writing. It's a primary concern. You want to make sure you're getting your ideas out there and that the reader can understand what you're saying. Beware of false erudition. You want to use words that are appropriate to your topic, that are appropriate to your purpose, and you want to use words that the reader is going to understand. You don't want to sound stilted or stuffy. Be careful and precise in word choice. Again, say what you mean. Make sure the word you're using is the word that you meant. Avoid making broad, unsupported generalizations. Be careful about saying things happen all the time when really they might only happen some of the time or even a majority of the time. But you can't just make blanket statements, make it seem like they apply to every person or every situation, because that's not entirely fair or accurate. Beware of using unclear and potentially vague pronouns. Remember, you shouldn't use the word "this" to refer to everything you just said or an entire previous paragraph or idea. Put modifiers as close as possible to the words that they modify. You want to eliminate confusion, so get those words as close as you can get them to what they describe. Avoid sexist language. Be respectful and aware of difference, and be inclusive. Be cautious when using second person, or you, or even first person. Use these with caution. Make sure you're using the pronoun that is appropriate to your meaning, to your context, and to the parameters of the assignment. And finally, be consistent with verb tenses. Use past tense when writing about historical events and present tense when referring to texts, but don't bounce back and forth between past and present tense if you're recounting events from the past, for instance. So, hopefully this discussion of clarity and how clarity can impact your writing and ways to improve your clarity has been helpful. If at any point you'd like more information, or if you have any questions, or you're concerned about the clarity of your writing, we hope you'll stop in, and we'd be more than happy to look through your papers with you at the Writing Center and address your concerns.